All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Inside the Pickle Jar. And I am thrilled to have Lisa Riegel here today. She has written a book called NeuroWell, and I really enjoyed this book, and I read a little bit into some of the backstory behind Lisa. But just a real quick introduction. Lisa started her career in education driven by simply one goal, which is to help people reach their potential. And over time, she realized fulfillment, whether in a classroom, a company, or community, really comes from understanding how the brain drives behavior and how systems shape success. That discovery became the foundation for her life's work. And as an educator, researcher, and author, she has spent 2 decades helping schools, leaders, parents, and organizations align brain science with human systems, creating cultures where people feel connected, capable, and in control of their growth. Dr. Regal earned a dual bachelor's degree in English and secondary education from Kent State University. She holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from Otterbein University and a PhD in education philosophy and leadership from The Ohio State University. Her work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals, and she has authored 5 books, including her 2 latest books, NeuroWell, that I mentioned, and Aspirations to Operations, focusing on brain science and how we can leverage it to help people become happier, healthier, and more successful. Welcome, Lisa. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for reaching out. I am fascinated with this conversation, especially the neuroscience piece. So I'm just really grateful that you're here to have that hear directly from you, all of that conversation. So thanks for being here and introduce anything else that I might have missed, and then talk a little bit about your amazing book, NeuroWell.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. So, NeuroWell is a compilation of really my life's work. So, I've been working in school transformation and really with that one goal in mind to help students and teachers become happier, healthier, and more successful. So, the book actually starts out with an understanding that all of our behavior, whether it's social or academic work behavior, yours, mine, all humans, not just kids, is the intersection of our biology and our context. And so the initial part of the book goes through several contextual factors that have made kids different today, and their brains are different. And I think context impacts biology. So I talk about that. Then I go into the actual biology of the brain and specifically how our brain creates perceptions and then how those perceptions drive our response to them, our behavior or our emotional reaction. And then the third section is really about how do we develop a culture that becomes kind of a safe bubble that's safe, supportive, and proactive within our schools so that students feel a sense of belonging, that they have voice and agency and safety, and where the system itself is proactive to the needs of the students rather than reactive. And then the last chapter or section of the book is how do we influence that change in the home? So how do we help parents set up kind of a curriculum of the home that can help their children succeed and thrive?
Oh, that's awesome. It's such a great book. And I can't, it's the fact that you're getting your life's work out there. I mean, you've written other books, but this is really fascinating work to me. You did write in the book that an educator's medium is the brain, but most are never taught brain science. So, what do you think is the biggest misconception educators have about how the brain works?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a tragedy that we're not taught a heavy dose of neuroscience. And, I taught at Ohio State in their leadership program for aspiring principals, and it was all org theory and policy and structure. But at the end of the day, we can have policies shape change, but people make change. So I think people, by and large, not just in education, but across the board, just don't understand how their brains work. And when we understand that, we can develop self awareness and self regulation, which ultimately gives us self control, which helps us be in control of our behaviors, our reactions, our futures, and our happiness. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that people look at behavior and they think that others are choosing that behavior. And the reality is 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose in the unconscious area of our brain. So there is a whole lot of thinking going on within our brain that we don't actually have access to. So it does a lot of processes before those messages are pushed up to the front part of our brain. And if we are under stress, or if we're in a situation where our body, our limbic system for our brain, thinks that we're in danger, then it hits the panic button. And when it hits that panic button, it actually sends the thinking part of our brain out for a cup of coffee. So it's not there. So we have a lot of people who are dysregulated who their limbic brain is really controlling their behaviors. And I see in schools teachers trying to reason with students or get them to talk about why or what were you thinking or things like that. They weren't thinking. So when we understand that biology piece, we really reframe the problems that we see and we come up with different solutions that are aligned to speak to the limbic system. And then context, we ultimately have control over. And so, how do we create a space in our classrooms and in the school at large that promotes a healthier and happier culture so that that brain is calm and ready to learn?
I'm just so fascinated by this. I've done a few podcasts around emotional intelligence and the
Yeah.
neuroscience behind it. And so your stuff is really like, it's just so running adjacent to some of the stuff I've talked about before. So if you could redesign teacher preparation, let's start from scratch. What's the very first neuroscience concept you'd require every educator to master?
I would require them to master the understanding of how perceptions are formed, how our past actually leads to our present, and how that brain, how that stress system actually works. A lot of people know, like, an inch of information about it. Most people understand the stress happens in the limbic brain, but to really understand how that impacts our thinking, our behavior, our identity, our self-esteem, our relationships, all of those pieces. And I can tell you just a quick explanation of this, and then you can learn more in the book. But when we have perception, so people think of the brain as like, this is me, and it's just my brain. But it's actually like a giant corporation with lots of different departments. And so I teach teachers and kids that their brain's like this giant corporation. And when we think about perceptions and stress and thinking, there's a few key departments that are involved. So the first is our vagus nerve, which isn't really in our brain, it's a big nerve. Runs down the sides of our neck, down around our heart and our stomach, and it kind of serves the purpose of systems manager. So it is constantly monitoring internally, it's called interoception. Is our heart beating okay? Is our stomach emptying food? Are our lungs working? So it's all those internal functions. And it also monitors proprioception, which is kind of where is our body in space? Because if we're standing right next to a cliff, we could be in danger. So it wants to know that we know where we are in space and that everything internally is working. It sends all kinds of messages to our thalamus, which is like our data center. And I call that data center Harold. And so Harold's job as our sort of data manager is he looks at all the information in the environment and he takes the information from our vagus nerve and he writes up a report. And the way he determines how we should feel about that or whether we're in danger, because that bottom part of our brain is about keeping us alive. So it is programmed to look for danger. And so we have to fight against that to get it to look for good things, right? Because it's always looking for, could we potentially be in danger? So what Harold does then is he goes into our sensory memory bank. And this is another misconception. People think we have a library of memories and you just kind of go in and pull out folders and read your memories. But it's actually our brain fragments our memories and puts them in lots of different locations. So, like episodic memory, totally different location than procedural memory, different location than sensory memories. So Harold only has access to our sensory memories. And this is why, like, if you walk into a room and it smells like cookies, your body relaxes because that's Harold saying, oh, the sensory information from the environment's telling me this is a safe place. This is a happy place. Because most of the time we have experiences with baked goods that are about holidays or families or grandma's house or something like that. So Harold goes into these sensory memories and he basically pulls out all the things that he thinks this is like that. And he creates like a series of filters, almost like lining up a whole bunch of like spaghetti strainers. And then reality hits, so we have our real data. And so if you think of that like a banana, you've got reality as the banana, then we shove it through all these different colanders that tell us how we should feel about it or think about it. You end up on the other side, it's still a banana, but it doesn't look like a banana. And I think it's really important that people understand every single person, siblings, even if they're twins, have different filters in their brain. And sometimes Harold makes false associations and holds on to them. So, for example, when I was growing up, my parents were divorced. So, my dad would pick me up for his night out, and he was always late. So, at 8 years old, I spent a lot of time on my front stoop waiting. My brain, because I was sad because he wasn't there, associated time with negative emotions of like, I'm not worth it or unlovable or, disrespected or whatever. So these negative associations. So throughout much of my life, until I started really understanding myself and gaining self-awareness, if I was running late or like if my husband was late, I would automatically have just anxiety and be angry about it. And sometimes it would ruin my evening. It would take me a while to get myself to not be angry, even though I knew why he was late and it wasn't his fault. Didn't matter. So once I understood that Harold is pulling these sensory associations between time and these negative emotions, then I had control. Because then I was able to have the CEO of my brain, which is that prefrontal cortex, send the message down to Harold proactively and say, hey, this is not that. You need to decouple that association. And I still don't like to be late, but now it doesn't ruin my day because I've been able to mitigate that stress reaction because our behavior starts in that unconscious part of our brain. And if we end up where we're super alarmed, we never get a chance to weigh in. And so that brings us to the other department. So we have Harold, who's our like data manager, and then we have I call him Bob. Bob is my security monitor. And Bob's job is to stand next to that panic button, read the report from Harold, and make a couple critical decisions. He has to decide, should we be stressed out? Are we really in, grave danger or just are we a little uncomfortable? And if he thinks, okay, we're uncomfortable, I'm not sure what to do, he just taps the button. And the message that goes up immediately to our CEO is, hey, I'm not sure how we should be reacting, but we need to be alert. So like I'm going to give you a little bit of stress chemicals to focus you and to get you really thinking and sharp, and then you let us know what you want to do. That's the phase we want to be in. But if Bob gets the report and says we're in danger, danger, and hits that button, that's when he sends out your CEO for the cup of coffee. And the problem is we have a lot of people today who go right from calm to alarm and they don't know how to be an alert. And so we end up with a lot of dysregulated people that are not being reasoned and logical about their actions. And that's why, like, if you ever have a fight and then when you're calm, you're like, why did I even say that? Like, I don't even believe that. Why did I do that? And it's because you didn't. Harold and Bob were trying to keep you safe. And so part of being NeuroWell is understanding that process within yourself, understanding what are those filters in my brain? Are they the right filters? Are they true? Or is this some leftover from, when I was 8 years old, I didn't know any different kind of thing? Do we need to decouple some of them? Do we need to tell Harold that he needs to look for positive things, that people actually are good and we're going to run it through a filter of good? And once we have that understanding, then we have the ability to regulate the brain and to have more control over ourselves and our behavior.
Oh, this is so great. You're speaking a little bit towards some of the conversations I've had around Carl Jung's work and shadow work and trying to
Hmm.
get those pieces back that you've been stuffing and why are you stuffing those pieces and what are the things that you feel shame about. And I love your analogy about Harold and Bob because I people are definitely building those neurosynapses, those pathways to immediately just hit the button. I don't feel good.
Yes.
I feel uncomfortable. I'm just going to quickly go, Bob's going to hit the button.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of knee-jerk gut reactions that way. And
Yeah.
yeah, very much.
Well, and what's nice as well is that if you teach students about their brain in that way, it reduces the shame. Because when we're out of control, we're not confident. We're not necessarily happy with what we're doing. And so when you teach it that way, then if I see a student who's really dysregulated, I can go up and say, what is Harold telling you about this environment? And
Yeah.
not what's wrong with you or why are you doing this? Because that assumes up here that there's intentionality when the reality is it's unconscious. Or if somebody's just having an emotional day and can't get a hold of themselves, it could be like, hey, Bob seems super agitated today. What can we do to help calm him down? And now you're an ally versus an adversary, and you're building that relationship that I know that this isn't the you. And, so let's figure out how to control these two. And I tell kids all the time, your job as the CEO of a company isn't to do the job of all the people within the company. It's to monitor that they're doing the job that heads towards your vision or towards your goals. And so when they're not, your job is to train them. And so, we can choose, we can have self-control, but then it does take intentional, repetitive practice because our brain builds those connections through repeated experiences and emotions that sort of solidify an automatic reaction.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. So, you in your book, you've spoken about this just a little bit. Um, but you say in the book, you argue that students' brains are fundamentally different today. What
Yes.
shift do you think educators underestimate the most?
Yeah, so I think that what they underestimate is the power that context has on the actual biology of our brain, because our context is what's shaping those folders. And so today, growing up, like we think of some of those folders are like our worldview. So when I grew up, I watched Little House on the Prairie, I watched Love Boat, I watched Happy Days. They were shows about like friendship and owning your mistakes, and your family's here for you and the community loves you. And so they created a worldview for me through that vicarious experience of media, that the world's pretty safe and predictable and people are kind most of the time. Not that you're not going to run into a jerk, but the jerk is the bad guy in that story. In today's media, the jerk is the hero. It's, hey, you and I are going to manipulate and we'll vote her off the island. And so it's a worldview, and the kids are inundated with that, with this sense of the world is chaotic and dangerous. People are out to get me. I can't trust people. I can't trust kindness. And that becomes one of those filters that they look at their current context through. Um, the other one is social media, which we all know is the devil. But the problem with social media as well is that it runs on a risk reward. So low risk, high reward, right? So I post a flag or a ribbon or a button and my Facebook profile or Instagram profile, and I get 4,000 likes. So super low risk. I didn't even have to do anything about the movement. I could just say, yeah, I think this is bad. I get 4,000 likes, huge reward. But in real spaces, we see a decline in altruism because there's a much higher risk if you fall down and I go approach you to help you up. That's riskier than just changing my profile picture. And then when you say thank you, I get one hit. So part of the NeuroWell culture is the idea of how do we create schools that provide that dopamine, that happy hit, that positivity in a regular systemic way, so that when kids are in that context, the filter in the brain that Harold's going to is this place is safe and people respect me and I can be calm here. The one other contextual factor that, well, there's two other actually. One is that we don't spend quality time with family and friends. We don't have downtime. We don't have unstructured time. And the problem is that, when I used to go to family dinners, they're boring. You're listening to adults talk, but you weren't allowed to get up or be on a device. You had to listen. And I learned the rhythm of conversation, and I learned nonverbal signals, and I learned how to ask questions when I was curious, or to drive a conversation the way that I could go so that I would be curious. We don't have those experiences for kids today. And so those kids are not getting that social engagement, just basis and foundation. So then when they come to a brick and mortar place, their body's on high alert because they don't feel comfortable in that context. They'd rather be online. And then the other one is like the medical industry wants us to be sick. And we have an over labeling problem in this country. And I would argue that, there's four states of awake. So you can be calm, alert, alarmed, or if you're in alarm all the time, you go to fear, where you start looking and seeing bad things where they aren't. We don't know how to be in alert, and alert is good stress. And so, like, I have two kids, 20 and 23. Both of them have said, oh, I have such social anxiety, to which I respond, everyone has social anxiety. If you go into a novel situation, your brain is designed to be on high alert because you don't know. You don't have this is like that because it's new. So I think today we have an intolerance of discomfort. And so when we go into that alert phase, we actually turn it into an alarm phase. And then we end up in that constant, hijacked brain, and then we get depressed or anxious, and then we go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes medication. But what we're not doing is teaching kids how to rewrite the story that their brain is telling them. And a lot of times that can be the fix. And I'm not anti-medicine. Some people need medicine. Some kids have true mental health issues. But there was a report from the National Institute of Health in 2022. We misdiagnose social anxiety 97.8% of the time. That's a pretty darn big misdiagnosis. And the misdiagnosis rates for depression and for bipolar disorder are above 60%. So we are looking at the symptoms and we're saying, oh, you get nervous, you have anxiety. But like if you went to the doctor and said, I have heartburn, they wouldn't say, okay, you have heartburn. They'd say, well, let's figure out why you have heartburn. And then they would give you a course of treatment related to whatever the root cause was. So I think that as just as people and as especially people who are working with kids, if we understand that biology of the brain, we can give kids power to stop from moving from discomfort into full-blown mental health crisis.
Yeah. I write and talk frequently about tiny steps towards your goals. A lot of people they are not comfortable being uncomfortable, to your point. And if you get comfortable being uncomfortable, just in the tiniest amount, you
Yep.
can make tiny steps towards really big goals. But you're
Yep.
right. The neuroscience of your brain is, if it throws you, like, you have to take the smallest steps so that you don't go from alert to alarm. And sometimes they're
Mhm.
smaller than you might expect. But yeah,
Right.
that's
Right. And
fascinating.
and some of the things are so easy to do. I think the first is really recognition and self-awareness. And even with teachers, I do a lot of school transformation work. And the smallest change that you ask a teacher to do can cause them a really overblown stress reaction that when, I can't do one more thing, I don't have time to do this, this isn't going to work, they go right into that negativity because they are under such pressure in that context. So, like, I have a new book out called Aspirations to Operations, which is really for leaders. And it's addressing that part of the human system of like, you need to create a space where teachers feel safe so that they have the ability to be using the top part of their brain as you're trying to make transformation. Because I see a lot of very dysregulated teachers who are burned out, who are exhausted, who are stressed all the time. And that's not good for them, and it's not good for kids, and it's certainly not good for the system.
Sounds like also a good subject matter for organizations going through change, like leaders
Mhm.
who are leading organizations through change, or leaders of, I'm thinking like product supply,
Yep.
sub-organizations within a company, because there's always so much chaos and change. Like, how do you manage through some of those things and give comfort to your employees in a way that makes sense, and
Right. And yep, that's exactly what aspirations to operations is about, is you've got this vision of what you want. How do you operationalize it? And how do you use brain science to do it? And in the world today with AI, I actually heard the other day that 60% of the jobs that will exist in 10 years, not new jobs, but the jobs that will exist will be jobs that don't exist today. And so when we talk about change, we are in a time right now that is concerning because we've already got stress regulation issues, mental health issues in our workplace. We've got quiet quitting, we've got burnout, we have all these problems. And now we're going to infuse a truly disruptive change to a lot of people whose brains are going to be, completely unable to cope.
Yeah, I mean, this is completely a little bit off script from my questions, but I notice a lack of neuroplasticity, where the ability or the desire to grow those new neurosynapses, or to be open to, I guess it's back to being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you don't, that's
Hmm.
sort of I mean, you could agree or disagree with me. I would love to hear your thoughts of, like, if you can't do that, you can't have neuroplasticity.
Well, and I think, I mean, again, I think the first piece is recognizing what is it you want to change. And,
Mm.
there's 7 conditions that have to happen for us to make our brain change. So the neuroplasticity depends on these 7 conditions. And the first one, like I always use the example of weight loss because everybody can, relate to that. So like if you and I decided we're going to get healthy, but we currently have a habit where we meet 3 times a week at the Mexican restaurant and slam like 4 margaritas and have chips and, cheese and queso and all that kind of stuff. The first thing we have to do is decide we want to change and realize that that's not healthy for us. The second thing we have to do is to know where to go instead. And so if I said to you, okay, let's stop the Mexican place, let's go to the Golden Corral, that's not a better choice, right? So we make assumptions that people know where to go, and a lot of times they don't. So we have to know, okay, we're going to have to go to the vegetable restaurant down the street. The next thing we have to have is self-awareness that when we're driving to that Mexican restaurant, because it's comfortable and familiar and we know the route and we've done it a million times, we have to be able to say, uh-oh, we're headed to the wrong place. We need to get off this road and go to the vegetable restaurant instead. Then we have to have the willingness to be uncomfortable, to your point, because you and I are going to have to put things in our mouth that we have never eaten before. And it's going to be uncomfortable. It's not our normal, even if we know our normal patterns are bad for us, those are at least comfortable and safe. And so, again, from a brain science perspective, that safety is where we get our comfort. So then we have to have energy. If you've ever lost weight before, say you've lost 15 pounds and not one person says anything nice to you, or you've spent a bunch of money on your hair and not one person says, "Wow, did you get your hair done?" It just kind of deflates you. And so when you're creating a new habit, it takes a lot of energy. It's like paving a new road in your brain. And so it takes physical energy and mental energy to do it. And that's where that dopamine comes in. So if somebody says to you, "Oh my gosh, you look great," and you get a dopamine hit, or you go shopping and you get a smaller pant size, you get a dopamine hit. And so we need that in order to maintain the persistence that we have to have in order to get through. And then one of the other characteristics is tenacity, because you and I will end up at that Mexican restaurant. We'll get tired one week and be like, "I miss it. Let's just go back to where we're comfortable." We'll go to the Mexican restaurant. But then we have 2 choices. We can either say, "That was fun going down the old road, but now my stomach hurts and I'm overly full, and that was probably not a great choice. We have to get back on the road and go back to the vegetable restaurant next time." Or we do this, which most people do. You and I were never meant to be healthy. So I'll just see you here again, right? Because we go back to that comfort. And then the last condition is support. We have to have support. Like, "I'll do it with you. I'm so proud of you. You can do this." And especially because we have to combat a lot of negative self-talk that Harold's doing in our brain. And the only way to do that is to continually provide yourself with affirmations, to have people around you supporting you, and then those serve as additional dopamine hits to keep the energy going to pave that new path.
Hope you enjoyed the first part of my conversation with Dr. Lisa Riegel. I think what she has to say about students in the classroom and how to help manage behaviors and how we've come so far and misunderstanding our students and how the systems maybe are failing them. I think you will feel some compassion and empathy towards some of this if you have children or if you're an educator or teacher. You've probably seen this. I also invite all the leaders out there to listen to this first part and think about their own organizations and how they might view their employees or those that report to them maybe in a different light, and can use some of these principles in managing and mentoring people better within the office or the classroom or even at home. So if you enjoyed this episode, please stay tuned for the next part that comes out in the following week, where we finish up the discussion with Dr. Regal. She has more amazing, interesting things to say. Please subscribe, please share, let others know about this work. It's so adjacent to everything else that I have been doing my podcast about of late. So anyway, big briny hugs from inside the pickle jar. I hope you're well, and I will see you in the next episode.